So building on the biblical foundations of Christian politics, we are now going to look at the philosophical foundations of Christian politics. And we're going to look at the four main philosophical currents that have really taken the biblical worldview and applied it to modern day society, which are Reformed political philosophy, the social teaching of the Catholic Church, integral mission, and liberation theology. I will spend more time on the first two and will only very briefly glance over the last two. So let's get started. Oh, before we start, I would like to express a number of recommendations. First, based on the warning in 1 Thessalonians to prove all things and hold fast that which is good, we're going to look at different philosophical currents belonging to different denominational approaches. And I would just like to encourage you to look at this with an open mind and try to learn from all these approaches and see what can be useful in your context. And also to forbear one another, really, so to look beyond denominational boundaries and also avoid any kind of denominational sectarianism. This is one Christian family, and so we can learn from one another. Okay, so to get started with Reformed political philosophy, of course, the founders of Reformed political philosophy are also the great Protestant reformers, Martin Luther and John Calvin, of course, especially John Calvin, who really developed quite a prolific reflection on politics and how Christians should behave in politics, which has been further developed by Althusius. And in the Netherlands, very specifically, at the turn of the 20th century, by Guillaume Groen van Prinster, Abraham Kuyper, who became Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and also Herman Dooyeweerd, gave us some very interesting reflections on what Christian politics is and how it should be properly understood and executed. And all these men were men of action. They were not just only thinkers. They also really had, most of them at least, had political activity as well as part of their lives, of their careers. So to start, I would like to make a point that's actually a point that's present in the work of Groen van Prinster and also Dooyeweerd, and about the relation between faith and politics. Because very often an objection is made to Christian politics and the involvement of Christians in politics, because it's said, well, there is separation of church and state in this country, and therefore, well, we don't want any confessional politics. But I would like to make a very important distinction between the principle of separation of church and state and the principle of separation of faith and politics, because they're really two different things. Separation of church and state means that the church has no influence over the state, like in the Middle Ages when emperors and kings were crowned by popes and bishops, and laws had to be approved by churches, by church leaders. Well, that goes against, of course, the principle of church and separation of church and state. It also means that the state cannot intervene in internal matters of churches, so no regulation of churches. So that's what the principle of separation of church and state means, but it does not mean that faith and politics, for that matter, should be separate. Actually, faith is a matter of trust, but it's also based on belief, on a system of ideas, and well, actually, we all believe in something. And so it's legitimate to base our politics on our convictions, just like a socialist bases his political convictions on socialism. A Christian will base his political convictions on Christianity. And there's also another confusion here, is that this feeling, this idea, this notion that faith should be a private matter. That's impossible. That's not feasible. You do not leave your faith in your home when you leave your house to go to work. Faith is part of who you are, and there's freedom of expression of ideas, including confessional religious ideas in the society. So there shouldn't be any separation of faith and politics, but what there should be is this healthy distance between the church and the state, and no subordination of the state to the church, or vice versa. This is a very important point. Now, let's go into some of the history, the political history of the Netherlands, and how Christian politics and Reformed political philosophy emerged. It actually emerged in a particular historical context that I'm going to describe now. And basically, it was at a time when Christians did not believe, like Christians in many countries nowadays still, in the importance of politics. But at the end of the 19th century, Christians started to organize spontaneously around four themes that were important to them, a subgroup of Christianity. First, they demanded freedom of religion. It was in a context when there was a church state. There was no separation of church and state. There was an official religion, and Christians belonging to another denomination, well, wanted the same rights and same privileges. So that was one trigger for the organization of this group. Then there was freedom of education. There was an important point to them because they wanted to educate children in schools that had the same worldview as them, and so they didn't want to send their children to just regular state schools. So freedom of education was very important. And then they also demanded the political emancipation of the population, because this particular group actually belonged to a group of people that did not have the right to vote at the same time. So they really pushed for a reform of the electoral system to make suffrage universal. And then also they demanded protection of the socioeconomically marginalized, because they were facing quite some economic hardships. So these were all reasons for these people to get together and organize. And actually, the thinkers that emerged around this organization are the ones that we're still discussing today and are part of this lecture. So Guillaume Groen van Brinster, I will skip his biography. You can read up on it on the internet. But basically, he considers that politics is a moral activity. So it's impossible to be neutral. So everything that's being said nowadays about that faith is a private matter and that politics should not have any religious connotation, that's just impossible. It's impossible to be objective. There's always a moral choice, a political choice that's being made. If you spend more money on education, that means that the money has to come from somewhere. So you may spend less on sports or on health. That's just how it is. Groen van Brinster is also one that really emphasized that politics is a logical continuation of being a Christian. You're not just a Christian in your own personal life. If Christ transforms you, then it should also transform your surrounding, your family, your school, your company, your country. So it's not like the transformation, conversion is something that's individual. It should lead to a broader transformation of society. Of course, Groen van Brinster really very much opposes liberalism, humanism, and a number of ideals of the French Revolution, which at the time seemed very positive, and many of them were actually very positive, but the spirit behind it was essentially anti-religious, anti-Christian. And one of the things he rejected was, for example, this claim that there is popular sovereignty that actually justifies universal suffrage, etc. And he's not necessarily against free elections, but the issue is that popular sovereignty makes makes no sense in his view, because God is sovereign. So saying that the people have the sovereignty is just ridiculous. Saying that the king has all the sovereignty is ridiculous as well. But God is sovereign. He governs, and regardless of what people believe and what politicians do and believe they should do, they have to submit to God's laws. They need to be obedient, whether they recognize it, accept it or not. Because the sovereignty of God is the source of all authority and of all justice in Groep van Prince's view. Another important point of Groep van Prince is this idea of being available, being a witness, just like Isaiah 6, after his calling, he responded to God that he was available to serve. Now, let's go to a concept that's really more part of Abraham Kuyper's thinking, that builds on Groep van Prince, of course. This idea of how society should be ordered. So there is a creational order of society based on the biblical worldview, but let's look at what this means. So the classic view of the state is of a pyramid, in which government is on top of the pyramid, and then it rules over the rest of society, and that together is called the state. Well, this is a perspective that Abraham Kuyper clearly rejects, because he considers that government is just one element of society. And also, the problem with viewing this in such a hierarchical way is, well, that society becomes a big black box and you don't know what's in it. And so instead, Abraham Kuyper promotes this view of societal spheres, of separated sovereignty, and that's really his view of government, and that's at the core of Reformed political philosophy. So what you see here is that there are different societies composed of different spheres. I'll quickly name them: science, business, healthcare, school, church, family, media, arts and entertainment, government. And a couple of things are important here. One is that government is just one sphere among others, just like the church is one sphere among others, but also the family, school, etc. And those spheres are interrelated because people belong to different spheres and intervene in different spheres, etc. But each sphere has a different nature and therefore also a different structure of authority. And that's really what the concept of sphere sovereignty refers to, that it's God's sovereignty that's expressed in each sphere. And each sphere should be autonomous, not autonomous from the creator, but autonomous from each other. And that's really the way God glorifies, can manifest his glory in society. And so what's very important to Abraham Kuyper and his fellow Reformed politicians is that the independence, the autonomy of each sphere should be respected, and there should not be an overreach, an intervention, unnecessary intervention by one sphere in others. So, for example, the government should not intervene in the church sphere or in the school sphere or the family sphere. Those should be left alone, unless it's strictly necessary. That there may be reasons for that, but in general, those spheres must be left separate. So that's the essence, and this really goes against this classic view of the state as this power pyramid. So sphere sovereignty recognizes that the government has a legal monopoly of power. The government owns the sword, as is said in Romans 13. So government can intervene in different spheres, but the question is, well, should it intervene? And really, normally it should not. And actually, what's also part of this is this notion that governing is not a matter of power. Government is a matter of justice, of righteousness, of public justice. And so the task of government is to create the conditions so that each sphere can develop and grow to its potentials, and create the conditions so this can happen. But the state is not inclusive, so other circles are not part of this single super community. It's not part of this pyramid with the church on top. With the state on top. And so the vision of government that then can be inferred from all this is of separate spheres with their own authority. Of course, in the church, the authority would be the pastor. In business, that would be the owner. In education, that would be the school principal. For example, the family would be, the parental authority, etc. So each sphere has their own authority, and they are independent but strongly interrelated. And this is very important. Here, this is where Groen van Pritser comes back again, is that there is a responsibility for the Christian in all spheres of society to contribute to the restoration of creation. Because all those spheres are fallen and need to be restored. And so, really, this is about different types of sovereignty. Sovereignty really refers to legal authority, and that may be a bit confusing, but that's what this means. And so the government protects with the sword, with the authority, with the power against injustice and developments that are not harmonious. So, for example, government may intervene in the family sphere when there is a case of child abuse or things like that. But the government may not interfere in the family sphere when the parents want to educate their children according to their own religion. The government has nothing to say about that. And this is just one example as illustration. So the vision of government is one of a limited government, and any intervention of the government has to be justified. In Parliament, government needs to be accountable to Parliament, etc. But there needs to be a good reason for it. There needs to be checks and balances, including inside government. The possibility of criticism is very important. And of course, government needs to be rooted in the law and in Christ Kurios itself, who is the owner of all sovereignty. That's a very powerful phrase. And remember also, and I believe I've mentioned this before in this course, the government is at the service of society and under the authority of God. So the ideal system of government would be representative, constitutional democracy, not an autocracy of a self-appointed elite, of course, no populism either, but really a government that's run by elected professionals who serve society and take into consideration the principles I mentioned before, within a framework of a constitution that protects public justice. So what's the scope of government? Well, first of all, it's limited, and it's limited to these three aspects: regulation, facilitation, information. Regulation, to preserve justice, to make and apply laws, to punish transgressions. Facilitations, to define the responsibility of each citizen. And so, for example, the state facilitates the harmonious development of different social spheres, societal spheres, by protecting them, like the institution of the family or the development of private business. And information, to give orientation. That's a moral mandate of government. So to inform about climate change, inform about the importance of healthy diets, etc. Well, this is a very brief overview of Reformed political philosophy.